So next, what I want to share about is scenario planning. And so if you've never heard of scenario planning, it's a great way to plan and mitigate for the future. Okay, and it happens in 4 steps. First, we identify the driving forces. We look at what are the potential things that could impact us? What are the trends that could impact us? You know, we could have power outages, we could have fire tornadoes, we could have a sickness at our school, we could have teachers quit, we could have an economic collapse, which means parents have to pull their kids out of school. They might have parents pulling their kids out of school for safety reasons. We could have kids not showing up because they get burnt out. We could have teachers getting burnt out. You know, all of those things are in the realm of possibility in the future. Next, we want to identify the critical uncertainties. So out of that list of trends that might happen, which I'll explain in a second, what are the 2 biggest critical uncertainties that might impact us? Okay. Next, we want to develop plausible scenarios for that, as in if this happens, then what? And then discuss the implications and the paths. So before I go into the exercise, I want to explain this why. Is that I can almost guarantee that something that you don't expect is going to happen soon. You can almost guarantee that something you didn't expect is going to happen soon. I just don't know what it is. And you don't know what it is. But why we do this scenario development process and why we work on it with teams is for them and you to be aligned in terms of what could happen so that you prepare. Sort of like doing a fire drill. Is that you don't know if there's going to be a fire, you don't know if there's going to be an earthquake, but at least you want to prepare yourself for those potentials. And if this happens, then what? If this happens, then what? And then how does that impact the rest of us? But what it'll help you do is it give you and your team an aligned way of looking at the future, anticipating what could happen, and then to be more comfortable. Here's the key part, to being more comfortable with uncertainty. Because you can't mitigate the uncertainty always, but you can be a little bit prepared for it. So how we do this is first we start off with a PESTLE analysis. And PESTLE analysis stands for political, economic, societal, technological, legal, environmental. Now, each one of these are going to have trends. So in your local city or province or state, you know, there's going to be things that happen at the municipal and federal level. In the United States, there's a federal election happening in the fall. You know, there's going to be changes that come out of that, probably one way or the other. They're going to impact schools and potentially funding. There's going to be things that happen at your local level that might impact funding. Now, there's the economic component of it, is what happens if COVID and the economy goes one way or the other? How is that going to impact teachers? How is that going to impact parents? How is that going to impact schooling? How is that going to impact their finances? How is that going to impact their mental state? It all comes from economic. Societal, anything having to do with society, as in people, humans, behavior. Do you think remote learning is going to increase? Do you think they're going to stop wanting to remote learn? Do you think they're going to be burnt out? Do you think they're going to be less burnt out, more bought in, less bought in, concerned with graduation, going into trade schools? Now you can look at this analysis and you can look at these trends over a year time, 3 years time, 5 years time, whatever you want. When we did this with the Faculty of Applied Science at the University of British Columbia, we did it over 10 years. What technological trends are going to happen? You know, there might be a proliferation of online learning tools that come out over the next little while to support exactly what we need. What legal changes are going to come? What environmental changes are going to come? And so all of these things, including environmental change of being like actually COVID increasing or decreasing, those are going to be trends that impact us as we move forward. So looking at this is identifying the driving forces, identifying the critical uncertainties, which I'm going to talk about in a second, develop the plausible scenarios, and discuss the implications and paths. So I'm going to screen share, and I'm going to share this workbook here. Okay, and I want to go through an example of, we have a workbook for scenario planning. I'm going to look at it over here, and it's going to guide you through this process. So first, like I said, you identify the driving forces, you look at the critical uncertainties. So I'm not going to go through this entire process of identifying the driving forces, but I do want to highlight, you know, some of them that might happen. Okay, so we've talked about border restrictions. How is that going to impact your school? Polarity politically, how is that going to impact your school? Political discussions, implications around healthcare, decrease in household disposable income, increase in the wealth gap, equity and equality, Of course, there's the whole racial issue that's going around the world, mostly in the United States. The fact that increased screen time, what are some of those things that are going to be? Want to look at all of the potential trends that are impacting your people and then go through this worksheet and identify them. Okay. Next, you want to pick two of the potential critical uncertainties. Okay. So, what I'm going to do here is what I think the most impactful trends are for you. Okay. So, I think one is student, and I'm going to put high student burnout and then low student burnout. And I'm going to say high cases of COVID. You can determine what high or low means. Low cases of COVID. So why I show it this way, and pardon the spelling and the typos, is that when you actually see that there are extremes towards this, that you know that life happens somewhere between these extremes. And again, don't get stuck on the high, low, because it's whatever it is. But in the range of possibility, or you could say increasing cases of COVID, decreasing cases of COVID, that there's going to be a world where there's decreasing cases of COVID and high student burnouts, decreasing cases of COVID and low student burnout, increasing cases of COVID and high student burnout, and increasing cases of COVID and low student burnout. So those are the potential worlds. And then you want to actually expand on all of those to say, okay, if there's increasing cases of COVID and increasing cases of COVID and high student burnout, what for us? And then what are we going to do about it? If there's low student burnout and low cases of COVID, do we go back to in-person schools? Do we remove the blended learning? If it's high student burnout and high cases of COVID, do we change our curriculum? So how this works is you're looking at all of the possibilities of what you could do, and then within it is probably what you're actually going to do. But by creating alternate scenarios, it gives you greater confidence in knowing what to do. And you do this in your regular life and saying, oh, if this bridge is closed, I'm going to take that route. Oh, if I can't buy this pizza or get this entree, I'll get this different one. If my husband's going to be late, then I will take the bus instead of taking the car or take a taxi. But what it does, it gives you confidence in uncertainty. It helps you manage the uncertainty, which means it doesn't take you out of the game. It means that as a leader, you can keep leading your people because you're not worried about the future. And I guarantee you something like this is going to happen because the world has not changed. In February this year, January this year, we were, I believe, operating with the sense that life was fairly certain. We are discovering that there is more uncertainty than we know. You could replace this with vaccine, no vaccine. Because basically there's a possibility there's a vaccine, there's a possibility there's no vaccine, and does it change how you address your work and do what you do? So I just wanted to share that as a tool. I think it's an awesome tool to be able to manage what you're trying to accomplish. I think doing it as a team is extremely valuable, and just being able to understand those implications are going to be key for you to be able to make better decisions as a team. Identify the driving forces, identify the critical uncertainties, basically pick two of that entire list, develop the plausible scenarios within that, and then discuss the implications and paths on how that's going to impact what you do. We talked about it for 10 minutes. It could take about 90 minutes to do with a team, but it's a really good option to look at all of the possibilities, so that once you look at the extremes and the possibilities, then reality is somewhere in the middle, and it gives people a sense of calm, and it helps you sort of prepare for your planning.